Hey, everybody, welcome to the challenge. This is John Chapman, the voice of one crying in the wilderness. And good to have you today on today's podcast. We're adding one to the week. And so there's just so much information coming on. We're going to try to get with you more and more with more opportunities on this. My brother forwarded me an article that I just have to take a look at because we have to. I know we're in Pride Month, so I'm going to talk about this because it's worth talking about. There's a couple things that come in on this ideal. All right, let me take a deep breath because when we see this cycle around, we need to pay attention to what's really going on. Many of us, I think, can get caught up in what we would call social correct, being socially correct. And we need to find ideas for what they are. We need to address things for what they are. And I just read this article in regards to it's an organization, it's a legal organization called the Southern Poverty Law Center. And the Southern Poverty Law Center just released a report. Apparently, they always do this. And the report is called Year in Hate and Extremism. And so they released this report, and it's not like anything's monitored, but what they do is they start reviewing different groups of people to try to identify, because we live in a society, of course, that you can't hate anything, and you can't hate at all. And so they released this report to assign the new non-moral, I'm going to say they call it a moral code, but it isn't, to organizations so that they can continue to promote things that others don't agree with. And I'm picking on this one because it brings about an ideal. So you've got a homosexual group of people who have come together, and after reviewing science, their own belief system, other doctors' reports, they are saying they oppose gender-affirming care, these homosexual groups. And in opposing gender-affirming care, we learn something, because when all the politics of this is going on and all the media of this is going on, you and I are led to believe that somebody, the LGBTQ community, who is pushing for this gender affirming care, or that any child should be able to choose what gender they want to be. And by the way, let me put a foot down on this for just a second. Nobody should decide an opposite gender of what you were born. That indicates a problem. Period. It's fixable, it's understandable, it can be discussed, and there's things that can be done to help any individual who would ignore that they have been born a specific way. And so now this is great, because before, the hatred was pointed at anybody who didn't agree with homosexuality as a lifestyle. And so they would be demonized as people that just hated homosexuals. Well, that has morphed into the LGBTQ community, and then pushing for, what we find is they're actually pushing for this to be some sort of social status. So they're preying on the weaknesses of people who want to willy-nilly decide that this is what they want to do with their lives, and especially the youth, especially the children from birth up to a particular age. They're pushing this as being, hey, this ideologically needs to be taught and understood. Well, this is what begins to happen. What has occurred here is that the Southern Poverty Law Center has released this, and I got this on reading this article from what's called WND. WND released this article. It's quite interesting, worth the read, I think. And when they released this ideal of Year in Hate Extremism, it includes actually putting down homosexual organizations that oppose gender affirming care. Now, let me draw this into context for you just a little bit. The context I'm going with is that we understand that people inherently, one of the major fallacies of humanity is we feel we need to be in charge. We need to be in control. We need to be in power. We need to be the ones who are right. And when you remove the ideal of there being something greater than us, someone greater than us, an intelligent design that we were created after. When you remove God from the picture, we are all we have. If you believe in God, you have to admit you ultimately can't be one in power. So when you start by trying to strike the idea of God actually existing, and he does, when you begin to strike the idea of the existence of God, then what you do is it is the war for power amongst people. And what we see is there is a lie that begins to become streamed, and we get tempted to begin to follow to go, oh my gosh, it's wrong to hate this, or it's wrong to hate that. And the hate has been used as the new term to be able to demonize anybody who doesn't agree with any certain political ideals or social status idealism. That's all it's become. That's all. Because if hate in and itself were evil, I would not be allowed to hate cow liver. And I, folks, hate cow liver. I can't eat it. I can't ingest it. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It means I can't. Now, I'm not a mean person if I don't love cow liver. Do you understand what I'm saying? So hatred can be removed. You should hate something that is evil. But when we've washed the lines, when there's no definition of even what that is anymore, and many of you who are listening to me right now, you know that there's a definition of what is right and what is wrong, what is the righteousness of God and what is evil, and you live with that inside of your heart, and you want to hold on to that. But right now, what begins to happen is there's this battle about what's right and wrong, that goes on, and then we try to make people who actually oppose what I'm seeing here, at least from the Southern Poverty Law Center and releasing the Year in Hate Extremism, this report that they turned out is what it has, and maybe inadvertently, but what it has done is now it opposes homosexuals. Oh, now this is interesting, right? Because it opposes homosexuals who oppose gender affirming care. How many of us thought that if you're homosexual, you automatically are for gender affirming care, meaning the changing of one's sexuality from birth? How many of us have thought that, right? You thought, well, if somebody's homosexual, they automatically agree with that. Well, here's another one. Let me throw this one out to you because this proves true too. Think of the ideal of feminism. Ponder that for just a second. Well, that would include all women. Well, indeed, it does not, right? Because feminism is an ideal. A woman is a woman. And feminism is an ideal of what they believe the power should be relinquished to in a woman, not the ideal of what a woman is to be or who she is to be by design or by birth. Feminism is an ideal. And then when you see the news, when you see the media, and you talk about anybody who's evil, if they're anti feminism, then you're anti what? Right? You're anti women. Well, that is emphatically untrue. And what begins to happen is now you have groups of women, for example, that go, look, I'm a feminist, but I'm a woman and I oppose the feminist ideals. I am for the freedoms that come from the laws for women, but I oppose the feminism that demonizes what I choose to do as a woman. And by the way, feminism demonizes demonizes family values, uh, demonizes God, demonizes purpose in a woman. It demonizes the fullness and capability and design and intelligence of a woman. It comes against them. And when a woman says, look, I oppose the political feminist ideals of feminism because I do something different as a woman, then all of a sudden, those women who don't agree with the feminist political ideals, well, now they're the what? They're the haters. They're the haters of that group. And now um, uh, we're seeing this come out in our own society, right? Tell me, you've assumed that if somebody's a homosexual, they would back gender affirming care. Well, it's changing that larger groups of homosexuals are going, you know what? That's not right. That shouldn't be happening for children. That should not be allowed for children. That should be not be going on for children. Well, now we have a new dilemma, don't we? because the lie that was propagated before caused us all to think that the idealism of affirming is across the board true of all homosexuals, and it is not. So now we understand this is simply an ideal that's being posed to us, not some sort of birthright or anything else like that. And that's what becomes convoluted and very crazy and confusing in the rhetoric and the discussions that are had by people, especially the media that poses this junk at us, right, and assumes a lot of things. And so it's interesting that they now have been lobbed into being a part of a hate group. So now homosexuals who disagree with this are considered haters. Think where that thread is going. I mean, that's hilarious when you think about it, because you would have assumed it to not necessarily be the case. Well, the Southern Poverty Law Center is famous for apparently they gained great fame by suing the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, into bankruptcy. And I can have an opinion or not one way or about that. I can agree with it or not, and that's fine. You can agree with it or not either, because that's, the potential that we have in the United States is to agree or not and then make your case. So apparently they are famous for bankrupting the Ku Klux Klan. Now, I'm not a fan of the Ku Klux Klan, but let me show you what I'm a fan of less. Because they had legal precedents set in their cases against the Ku Klux Klan, they now try to attach other ideals to the Ku Klux Klan so that they too are demonized. Well, why are you going this way? Because a precedent has been set, and everybody believes the Ku Klux Klan is a people who hate African Americans. That's what they believe. Okay. And you can believe that, and it's pretty much true, right? That's what that organization was, of which was built from the Democrat Party. But, do your history, check it out. That was the participating group in that group. So you've got the Ku Klux Klan that's been sued into bankruptcy, and this law firm is excited about this. But now, because that precedent or that ideal has been set up, what they begin to do is they begin to use that. So now Christians are going to be demonized, right? So if Christian says, "Hey, I don't agree in the lifestyle of homosexuality," then they're going to take that and they're going to lob you into a hate group, because they're going to accuse you of judging somebody's choice of sexuality in the same way the KKK came against blacks for being black. You see where that's going there? So they use that as a precedent to use that against you. Then you have to feel guilty. Then you have to start conforming to that conforming to that ideal within the culture. And so what we have going on here is many people have disagreed with gender affirming care. So we have to ask the bigger question: what is this really then? Is it a power struggle of idealism so that people who believe in this can have the power? And in the democracy, the democracy that we live in, which allows for the voting of this, that, and or the other thing, we have a desperate group of people, and they all want to be in power. And all of these people who want to be empowered desperately, it can't be won on good ideals anymore, because we're not having those conversations. It can't be happening, it would seem, on truths, investigations, understanding, fundamental principles that are unchangeable. We're trying to change every single one of them. And the only way to do that is, in doing so, to change every one of those fundamental principles or leave what doesn't change. Now we can demonize anybody by calling them a hater, because we're going to line them up with, for example, the Klan. And that's ridiculous. That is a ridiculous premise to come from. And so let me read a little something here that I wrote down. This is interesting, and I want you to know that when you see these programs, when you're joining us live, when you're in there, make sure you put your comments in there. Make sure you get involved in the conversation. Let us know what you're thinking in regards to that, because I'm about to let you know what I think right now. I'm curious to what people think about what it is to hate. I am curious. Let me add to that a little bit, because I want to add. I want to be better in that description that I want to hear from you about. What is a hate group? Because that's what they're talking about here. What is a hate group? Um, Equally, so ponder that for a second. You need to think about it, because this word hate is being thrown around like ice cream. This word, the word hate is being thrown around like hello. I mean, it's become such a common part of the conversation with people. We say it and we feel like, oh, I use the word hate and somebody else is a hater, therefore I'm the one who's justified. I've used the great word to show my own morality because obviously I don't hate. And then there's the question mark: what don't you hate, or who don't you hate? Right? Hate in itself is not wrong. Read the Bible cover to cover. Hate in itself is not wrong. It is a function of people, and there is a right way for it, by the way. It is not at people, but it is at ideals. Hate should be in place towards wrong ideals that are destructive to people, communities, countries, and societies. So I wrote this down, and I'll be curious to what you come up with in the comments. What do you think a hate group is? And this is what I think it is. It is any group that needs to accuse someone of hate so you can appear right when you have nothing lawfully or constitutionally to stand on but need to be in power. So a hate group is just a point of accusation. That's what I think. To call anything a hate group is simply so that an individual can be justified in them remaining in power because they have actually no lawful or constitutional basis. You think about this just for a second. I'd also call it the big lie. If you call anybody a hate group, you're not interested in freedom of speech. You're not interested in others having the freedom to decide what they want to decide. You just don't want to argue the merits. And when you don't want to argue the actual merits of it, you just start slinging junk. I think there's a word I'd like to use it. It's not lawful for me to use. I'm told anyway on the internet. They start slinging junk. And when you start slinging, oh my gosh, they're a hate group. Oh, so you don't have anything really lawfully or constitutionally to stand on. You're just trying to remain in power by demonizing another group. And you need to remain there. It's the only way you can remain there because the merits themselves you don't have. And so you no longer have the ability to do that. I want us to consider this. This isn't going to be a long podcast, and I'm going to be wrapping it up here in just a minute. But this is that same ideal. See, when we bump into this sort of stuff, you need to know where you're at in your life, and you need to know where you stand. You need to know what you believe. You need to know why you believe it, and you need to know if you believe it that well, are you going to believe it until your last breath? This is why the Lord God is so important in your life, because the only thing he ever says about himself are things that never change. And you have to take a look at yourself and you go, do I believe in things that continuously change? Or do I believe in things that do not change? And it is the only way to line your life up. To line your life up with truth that does not change is the only way to discern the untruths, the lies that are actually happening before you. And it is the lies that are causing our very culture, our very society to no longer be able to govern within itself. And yet is the tyrannical power that happens above us through shame and guilt to try to suppress or oppress you from saying what you actually believe, and then saying it in a way that is very disagreeable. But the character of our hearts, the love and or hatred that comes out of us, that's dependent upon you and the Creator. That part is dependent upon you and the Creator. And if you don't have the Creator as the litmus paper to whether you are loving somebody or not loving somebody, if you have a problem with hating people instead of hating ideals, maybe listening to this podcast will help gear you a little bit towards going, you know what? Maybe I have been hating people, but it's an idea that I hate. How can I figure out how to love somebody and firmly hate their idea? Because there's nothing wrong with that in our Constitution. That is why the freedom of speech is in play. But how we do it depends on the character, the content of that character within us. And that is solely dependent on where you stand with God, the Creator himself. Is it not? The other example of this that came up, and I know I'm talking about this one because it's Pride Month. I would recommend Humility Month, because if you caught our podcast yesterday, we were talking about to celebrate Pride is to celebrate being separate from God at every level, because that's all pride can do. It makes me also think of when the parents rose up and we were starting to teach, and it was it was COVID was going on, and then through COVID, things were being taught. So you had sexual books that were being taught or brought into school for kids to learn. You were having the woke agenda being brought in there, and parents, if we believe in democracy, parents were starting to do, if anything, when something happens that is truly disagreeable in a society, those people have been quiet for a long time begin to rise up and go, "Hey, this is America. And now we're going to start doing our job." It is interesting to me that the Federal Bureau of Investigation started saying these parents who were a little upset about the junk that was being allowed in the schools, and they should be. Why? Because this is a democracy. How is it even possible that the Federal Bureau of Investigation would then label these parents, not even as hate groups, but to go all the way to domestic terrorists to try to squelch what? Free speech, and demonize them as haters. And so far as terrorists, these parents who are terrorists. You see, there's an ideal going on that's being forced on you. There is untruths that are trying to be made societal norms on us, on you, in your family, in the personal decisions you make, which is why you need to hold fast to the other side of this conversation, which is the Lord God Himself. And that's the place where your relationship needs to go, because that's the only thing that does not change. It's Him. And you're going to want to run to Him. And if you've been away from Him, you're going to want to get closer to Him. And if you want to figure out how to do that, you're going to want to reach out to us. We've got some pretty great ideas and ways to point to you to go so that you can get there in your life, because that's the only one that doesn't change. And society around you is changing like a storm every single day. But you need to be able to hold fast. You need to be able to stand exactly where you are. And you need to not be afraid to say exactly what you believe, because we see the hypocrisy. Think about it the next time you watch the news. Begin to break these things down. Who am I? Am I kind of an individual who opposes people, or do I oppose ideals? And when ideals crisscross like this, we see that it's an ideal that's being shoved down our throats as some sort of societal morality, when even those who I would disagree with their lifestyle, I wouldn't disagree with them as a person. I wouldn't not love that individual. But because anybody chooses to do something that the Bible says do not do, that's not grounds for me to hate them. But it is grounds for me to disagree with what they choose to do. Look at how messed up our society when it even happens that that group of people now is being demonized as haters when they don't even agree with an agenda that apparently goes far beyond that. And that is a question you're going to have to ask. Where does that agenda actually come from? And what is it actually wanting to do to our society? This is a question that we have to ask ourselves, is it not? I tell you what, it's good to be with you today. Make sure that you find others to join us on Rumble. We want to hear your comments, and we look forward to that. And I hope each and every one of you are going to have a great rest of your week. I don't know. We might see you tomorrow. We might not. I'm still trying to figure that out in my mind. But, God bless you guys. You know what? Choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, I will serve the Lord.